world of urban farming is booming all over the country, with swarms of city dwellers looking to start beehives in their neighborhoods and on their rooftops. Businesses like Whole Foods in East Liberty are keeping hives on their property, and community beehive rentals fill up faster and faster each year. But many cities like Pittsburgh are struggling to accommodate people who want more wildlife and those who don't. Steve Repasky, your reputation as a bee handler precedes you. You're the guy who goes out and handles beehives when a distressed resident sends out a call. How did you develop your rapport with bees?
I actually grew up around bees. I grew up on a small hobby farm about an hour east of Pittsburgh. My dad kept bees as a kid, and just recently my mom unearthed some old photos of me, 4 years old, dressed up in my dad's beekeeping gear. So I grew up around it, and being around the farm, and I went to school for wildlife biology at Penn State. I kind of fell into the general scheme of things and found the more I became more involved with bees, the more fascinating they were to me. I started out as a rural beekeeper. I then got married and moved to the city, and I moved all my hives and became a true urban beekeeper in that sense. But as I grew as an urban beekeeper, I ran out of place to keep my hives, because obviously in a small backyard in Dormont, you have less than a quarter of an acre, and 6, 8, 10 hives start to clutter the backyard with bees, so to speak. So I expanded from there, and you start to talk to folks and ask them about permission to put hives on property. You get to know other beekeepers who live in urban settings but have little pieces of paradise, if you will. They own 2 or 3 acres within the city, and it is an urban setting, but you have enough elbow room that you can move around. And so now I have hives in the Monroeville-Plumboro area. I have them in the North Hills. I have a couple at Hahn Nursery. I have hives out in Aliquippa. I have them scattered everywhere. It's not like some of the rural beekeepers where you have a lot of acreage and you could just put 50 hives down and go out your backyard, check those hives, and be done with it. For me to check my hives, it can take a full day, because I'm driving 20 miles to check 5 hives, another 15 to check 4 more hives, another 15 to check 2 hives, and it just, you're hopscotching all around, and it has its challenges. Okay, so today we're at the 3rd week of June. And today we're going to start harvesting honey, or at least the honey that's ready to be harvested. And how we determine that is that if it's at least one frame is 90% capped, we know that the honey is ripe, which means it should have at least an 18% or less moisture content. So what we're going to do is we have 3 honey supers on this honeybee colony, and I'm just going to go through super by super to determine which ones are filled and which ones aren't. These are nicely capped. They're not perfect, but they're close enough. Occasionally I get the comment of, why is your honey so expensive? The bees do all the work. And they do quite a bit of work. The work actually is done by the beekeeper. It takes a lot to get it to that final product. So when we harvest honey, it's a fine line of when honey is ripe and ready to harvest and when it's too late to harvest. If it's too early, the honey isn't ripe, it's high in moisture content, it could ferment, and then your crop is ruined. And if we're too late, there's very little food coming in, and the bees actually eat what you had intended to harvest, but you were too late. There you go. That's just about as perfect as you're gonna get. Oh, never mind. That's pretty nice on that side, though. Nice light spring honey. Once all the supers are void of bees, they get put on the truck, and they get taken back home to where we can prepare to harvest the honey itself. Frame by frame, I take my hot knife and I just run the hot knife along the face of the comb. And what that does, it takes off a paper thin layer of wax, which is holding that honey in the frame. The hot knife takes that layer of wax off. I do it on both sides. I place it into the extractor. We turn the extractor on, and we start it at a slow speed. And what that starts to do is it starts to spin the honey out. And then we bring it up to full speed, and the honey, through centrifugal force, is drawn out of the cells to the outside wall of that extractor. It runs down the sides of the extractor, down to the bottom where there's a gate. That gate then allows the honey to flow into a strainer, which will strain out pieces of wax, bee parts, anything you don't want in your honey. It goes through the strainer into a bucket. Once we extract all of our honey and we have it in buckets, we can then start bottling. The process I use for extracting all this honey is basically the final product is raw, unprocessed honey. So we're here today in Mowry Park in Pleasant Hills, and I got a phone call from the borough. They were cutting down some trees, and one of the trees that they had cut down had a honeybee colony in there that they were unaware of. And when the tree fell, it split open here, and the comb of the colony kind of fell out onto the ground, and the bees were all over the ground as well. So they called, and knowing that honeybees were experiencing a decline, they wanted to do their best to save them and relocate them rather than just kill them. The challenge in a situation like this is that there's comb everywhere, there's bees everywhere, they're in the air. So what I did was I took a small nuke box and placed it on the ground near the cluster of bees. There's some comb here that we're gonna pick up eventually as well and place it in the box. What I did, since they're now homeless, by providing this 5-frame nuke box, you can see the bees they're recognizing it as their new home, and they're walking straight up in. Earlier, we watched the queen march in along with the rest of the bees. So what we're gonna do now is just clean up, put some of the brood comb in the box, let the bees get in there. I'll get some smoke going and kind of usher them towards their new home. And once we get most of the bees in here, we'll let it sit until nightfall, come back and pick it up and take it to one of the outyards. So it's another colony saved and more bees for me to take care of. So being an urban beekeeper, I'm not just a beekeeper. Part of my job as an urban beekeeper is also helping out the city and residents of the city with their bee problems. And that includes removing full-blown, fully established colonies from walls of houses and buildings and the ceilings and occasional trees and things along those lines. It's a job that not a lot of people are comfortable doing. It does require knowledge of bees, basic beekeeping. It requires knowledge of the biology of the honeybee, what to expect when you open up that established colony, and it requires some knowledge of construction of houses. Think of how a house might be built so that you know where to locate that colony within the wall or ceiling, and that you're not cutting 15,000 holes trying to find one colony of bees. Once I assess the situation and determine that they might be in a wall or ceiling, I could then proceed with the actual removal. And that consists of a lot of cutting, a lot of prying, and specialized tools that aren't typically found in your big box stores. They're tools that beekeepers have modified. For instance, I have a shop vac that is modified to take the bees and suck them up into a modified hive body so it keeps them alive. But the suction is at such a low rate that it doesn't, it's not used for cleaning up sawdust, it's used for sucking up bees. So that's a little bit of a modified tool. This whole process will continue until everything is removed. All the bees, all the wax, anything that goes inside that wall cavity is removed. Once the job's complete, I take the comb and the bees back. It's all combined. The bees get settled for a few days. At that point, I go back in and assess the health of the colony, see if the queen was in there, make sure that everything's good for them, and then I just work on maintaining their health and structure and try to get them back on their feet, so to speak, and get them through the winter and hopefully next year produce some honey. So we're in Carnegie, PA, and what we have is a swarm of honeybees, which is actually rather late. It's the end of August, and typically swarming occurs in honeybees here in western Pennsylvania, usually starting around mid-April, continuing through the first week of July. We're well beyond that date, but of course it's been an unusual year overall. But what swarming is in honeybees, it's nature's way of dividing on a large scale. And what will happen is when a colony becomes too large for the home that they're in, they recognize that, and they begin preparations to split and divide by swarming. Another part of my job as an urban beekeeper is to chase swarms. I guess I've started to call myself a swarm chaser for the number of swarms that I do run around chasing in the city and suburbs surrounding Pittsburgh. A swarm of honeybees is very docile. They're engorged with honey, they're homeless, and they're just looking for a new location to live. So this is just a temporary resting place. So we're gonna trim the branches away little by little and expose the colony, and as gently as possible put them into a box here. It's a good time to educate the public because more often than not their neighbors come out, the postman stops to watch, the police officers stop to watch. So it's a good time to educate the public as what honeybees are, why they're important, and why you shouldn't just take a can of Raid or a fire hose to a swarm when there's no harm in the swarm itself.
Well, you gotta just jam it in there.
I'm not gonna jam it, I'm gonna place it down. It's like a bomb, remember?
That's right, the bomb squad.
It's a couple more branches off.
It's a bomb to me.
Well, you lost a couple.
Typically, a swarm's survival rate in the wild is less than 10%, even during a normal swarming period, which is mid-April through mid-July. In this case, an August swarm is a dead swarm. By the time they found a place to set up residence and built out enough comb and stored enough honey, more than likely winter would have hit pretty hard, so they most likely would have just perished during the wintertime. There's a saying that says a swarm in May is worth a load of hay, a swarm in June is worth a golden spoon, and a swarm in July isn't worth a fly. There's nothing for August except a swarm in August has no chance. But these guys, we're going to give them a chance, and for the size of it, I think they'll do okay. Burg Bees is Pittsburgh's urban beekeeping organization. We were founded in 2008 with a mission to promote sustainable beekeeping as part of urban agriculture. Our motto is urban beekeeping at its best because that's what we're here to do. We're here to train beekeepers. We're here to educate beekeepers. We're here to educate the public, the non-beekeepers, about honeybees and the importance of honeybees. We are actually the nation's first community apiary, and the community apiary functions just like a community garden would, where individuals within the city could apply for a spot to put their hive, but they buy the bees, they buy the equipment, they take the honey. It's their hive. They manage it how they want. We just provide the location for them, and it's been very successful. It takes about 8 pounds of nectar to produce 1 pound of wax. So this chunk of wax here, I think, weighs about 4 pounds. So you're looking at about 40 pounds of nectar or honey to produce this ball of wax. I like to educate folks. I like to teach. I think the enthusiasm I have for it can be passed on to others, hopefully. That's pure beeswax. It's the same thing that candles are made out of. It's the same thing that other products of the hive are made out of, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. That's why I got my Master Beekeeper certification. That's why I'm involved in Burg Bees, because you could pass along that excitement. You could pass along the wonderment of honeybees. And they produce little sheets of wax that's literally paper thin, if not thinner. Each one of those little pieces is taken off their abdomen and then formed into these hexagonal cells, perfect, six-sided, opposite each other. It's kind of one of the little neat things about honeybees, how perfect everything is that they draw. Though there are many positive things that happen in beekeeping, there's also the negative aspects of being a beekeeper. It's always frustrating to have one of your very strong colonies suddenly die in the winter.
The winter of 2012-2013, I lost actually 70% of my colonies. 2-3 hives every year is not a big deal, but when you lose 70%, I went from 35 mature producing colonies down to 12, of which those 12, several were just hanging on by the skin of their teeth, if you will, just to get through. It's not a fun feeling. It's not one that I want to have very often. When you go into a hive in March and you find a cluster of bees the size of your fist struggling to hang on, and you know that colony is not going to survive, it's heartbreaking. And even worse yet is the colony next to it, and the colony after that, and the colony after that, and the colony after that. You open it up and there's not a single bee in sight. They're gone, they're dead. It hurts. Colony collapse has hit home at this point in time. It was always out there. We still don't know what's causing it. We have some ideas of multiple factors like genetics and nutrition and pesticides and habitat loss and those types of things. But reading about it in the newspaper is one thing. Walking into your outyards and experiencing it firsthand, that's another thing. That's a wake-up call. Not that it wasn't real to begin with, but it hits home. Rebuilding after a loss like that can be tough. Fortunately, I have some strong colonies that I can make splits off of. I've caught some swarms this year, so I'll build off of those. I removed several colonies from structures, various buildings, so I'll use those wild colonies that survived the winter to build up as well. But when you take a 70% loss, it's not a recovery in 1 year. It's going to take 2 or 3 years to build, but slowly, making splits, catching swarms, removing wild colonies from buildings. We'll get there, one step at a time.
What does the future hold for me? I know for one that I'll probably always be a beekeeper, no matter where I am. You know, I've often had this talk with my wife of, you know, what if we move? I'm set up pretty well here in the city. I mean, I've got all these places with great relationships, hives everywhere. And if we move, I have a lot of bees and a lot of equipment to move. I might have to reduce my numbers a little bit, but I could always tell you I'll at least have 2, 3, 4 hives out my back door. That's something for me that, you know, once I latch on to something that I really enjoy, I stick with it. And it may, you know, ebb and flow in how much I'm involved, but I'll always be a beekeeper. Once a beekeeper, always a beekeeper. It's in you.